The market has accepted that PSA is the standard for grading. Whether we think it's right or wrong, it doesn't actually matter what we think. It matters what the market thinks. After grading thousands of cards, there's one thing that's very clear, and that's that grading is not perfectly consistent. It never has been, but that also doesn't mean that it's completely random either. It's an imperfect system, but it's the system the card market runs on. And if you grade cards, if you want to grade cards, if you buy graded cards, the point isn't whether or not grading is actually perfect. It's just to understand what grading is and to understand the game you're playing with graded cards. So let's start by talking about the perfect world version of grading. And this is what a lot of people think grading should be. And that's that if you send a card to be graded, it's going to be graded on the exact same scale. It's always going to be graded 100% accurately. There will never be a difference between one submission and the next. You're always going to get consistent results. And absolutely, that makes sense to me. That's what I would love to see for grading moving forward too. It's just that that's not reality. And it's never been the reality of the grading game. And the reason for that is because human beings are grading your cards, not machines. And I don't know about you, but I'm certainly not perfect. And I know that if I was looking at the exact same card 100 different times, I'm probably not going to give it the exact same grade all 100 times. So there is going to be some variance, some just human error from one submission to the next. Even if you send a card in to be graded, you get the grade back, you crack it out of the case, you send it back to be graded again, and you repeat that process, like you're going to get some different grades. Sometimes the results will vary widely. And guess what? That doesn't surprise me at all because human beings are grading your cards, not machines. So when you really look at the difference between a PSA 10 grade and a PSA 9 grade, for example, they're really close, right? Like there's not a lot of difference between those cards a lot of the times. And there are some times where you're going to get a 10 on a card that probably should have been a 9. There's going to be other times where you're going to get a 9 that probably should have been a 10, or at least could have been a 10. There's a gray area in between this. This is never an absolute where you're going to be able to say before you send the card off, this is 100% a 9, or this is 100% a 10. So I always look at grading like this. It's not the question of, is this a 10 or is this a 9? It's what's the chance of this card getting a 10? Because it's a sliding scale, right? Like there's variance depending on the day, depending on the severity of any flaws. And when you have human beings evaluating cards, you're going to have them looking at the different flaws a card might have a little bit differently. So let's say a card is absolutely flawless, except there's a tiny little surface scratch, just a little one off to the side. Well, some graders might look at that and say, well, that's a pretty deep scratch. I'm going to ding this down to a 9. Other graders might look at that and say, yeah, but the rest of the card's perfect. I'm going to give this one a 10. Like there is some variance like that. Is that fair? Is that the way that things should be? Maybe not. And I'm not here to tell you how things should or shouldn't be. I'm just here to talk about how things are and what we can do to make the most of them. So just because your card came back a 9 instead of a 10 doesn't mean grading is broken. In fact, a lot of times if you are someone that's newer to grading and you've only sent 10 cards, you've only sent 20 cards off to be graded, like you haven't sent enough cards yet to even have a legit sample size that we can draw any conclusions from. And everyone wants to point the finger, right? Like everyone wants to jump to social media and say, well, PSA is broken and they're inconsistent because I got 9s instead of 10s. But what I don't see a whole lot of is people, instead of pointing the finger, them pointing at themselves and saying, hey, maybe I didn't evaluate these cards the way that I should have. Maybe I still have some learning to do here. Because guess what? Grading is a learnable skill. It's not something that we're inherently born with. You have to learn how to evaluate the condition of a card. And the more reps you get, the better you're going to get at it. My very first grading submission going back 20 years ago, I was extremely nervous because I had looked the cards over. I thought I had done a good job, but I just didn't have any reps. I didn't have anything to base it on. So I was sending these cards off not knowing how they would do. I ultimately went 4 for 5 on my first order, and it helped me build some confidence that I could be successful with grading, and I sent more cards and continued to do well. But each time I got results, it helped me kind of refine my eye for what I was looking for. What are the kinds of cards? What are the kinds of flaws that are going to ding the grade down to a 9 rather than getting that gem mint grade that we're all looking for? And with more reps, you will get better at this process. There are also a whole bunch of tips and tricks you can learn along the way to help improve your results. Now, that's not what this video is about, but if you do want more on that, I've got other videos on my channel where I break down my entire grading process. I'll leave a link in the description if that sounds at all interesting. But the key takeaway is that grading is not broken. It's the same process that it's always been. There is inconsistency built into the grading process. And what you have to understand is that this isn't going to be perfect. It never will be, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect for you to still be successful. And so you just have to understand what's the game you're actually playing here. And so here's what I can tell you. So I've graded literally thousands of cards over the past 2 decades. And while I've absolutely had cards that I thought should have graded higher, I've also had cards that I thought should have graded lower. It goes both directions. And what you realize as you send more and more cards is that they do get it right far more often than they get it wrong. There are absolutely patterns you can look for to level up your grading results, and it is very much a learnable skill. So no matter how random you think it is, I can tell you for a fact that it's not completely random. You might get a weird grade from time to time, but that doesn't mean that the entire process is random. One thing to consider doing is tracking your all-time gem rate, because what this is going to do is help you understand how good of a grader are you specifically. And it'll help you decide, are your standards too tight where you need to loosen up and take some more chances, or are they too loose and you need to tighten up so you're not wasting money? I've submitted thousands of cards and I know that my gem rate is just under 70%. So when you're talking about complete randomness, the thing is, my grading results are usually pretty close to where I think that they're going to be. My actual target is 70%. While I would love to see 100%, it's not realistic to expect all 10s. And also, if I'm sending orders that are only coming back as 10s, that means that I'm very likely leaving money on the table, because some of those cards that are borderline will get 10s if I just take a chance on them. So when you send cards that have big time upside, it is well worth the risk sometimes to try those cards, even if you think they're borderline between a 9 and a 10. Sometimes they're going to go your way, sometimes they're not. But if the upside is there, a lot of times that still works out in your favor to give those cards a shot. So whatever your grading results look like, I can tell you across thousands of cards, and really committing to refining my approach and refining the way I evaluate cards from a condition standpoint before I send them off to be graded, you can absolutely learn this skill and get good at it and continue to raise your gem rate over time. But the key is it has to be a large enough sample size. So if you send off a small order of 10 cards and you get 8 PSA 9s on that order, and then you march off to social media to complain about how PSA is rigged and grading doesn't work, I promise you it does work. You just need more reps. You need to give yourself a chance to win. And part of this is there is going to be some variance. I get bad submissions back every now and then as well. But in the grand scheme of things, those submissions don't even really matter. They're a drop in the bucket compared to the big picture when you're submitting hundreds or thousands of cards every single year. So just consider the scale and consider the possibility that, yeah, you might have gotten a little bit unlucky with one submission, but if you send 5 submissions, 10 submissions, 100 submissions, then we can talk, because then you'll have some actual data to work with. And I can also just tell you for a fact that if you commit to actually learning and getting better at your craft and you send 10 submissions or 20 or 100 submissions, you are going to improve your results between that first grading order and that 100th grading order. You're just going to get better at evaluating cards and knowing what to submit and what not to. But it does take some work, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes money. And so you have to decide if you're willing to commit to that process and give yourself a chance to send off a handful of grading orders before you decide whether or not it actually works. I promise you it works if you give it enough time. All right, now let's zoom out for a minute and let's talk big picture. So human beings want the nicest version of things, and the card market is no different. So why would we pick a PSA 5 if we could pick a PSA 10, right? The 10's always going to have more demand than a 5. It's just common sense. And so it makes sense that buyers would be chasing the PSA 10s and would be willing to pay bigger premiums for them. The market has accepted that PSA is the standard for grading, whether you believe it or not, whether I believe it or not, whether we think it's right or wrong. It doesn't actually matter what we think. It matters what the market thinks. This is the way the market operates, whether we like it or not. And then we get to decide whether or not we want to take part in it. Now, because the market is willing to pay these big premiums for PSA 10 grades, again, whether fair or not, whether the grades are justified or not, it doesn't matter. The money is there for a lot of these cards when they get that grade. And to some people, they're going to say, well, that's stupid. People shouldn't pay this or that for a card. People are willing to pay what they're willing to pay, right? It's not my decision to decide what someone else wants to pay for a card. But if I know that someone else is willing to pay that for a card, why wouldn't I want to take part in the grading game? If I can evaluate cards and go out and buy clean, raw copies of cards and send them off to be graded and then make a bunch of money when I get a PSA 10, sounds like a pretty cool play to me. You get to take on a side hobby that involves sports, money, business. Like, it's really cool. It's a lot of fun. And when you understand what you're doing with grading, you can do really well financially with it as well. It absolutely takes work. It's not a get rich quick thing. There are no guarantees, but you can learn the skill and use it to make money. Another thing that I see floating around out there a lot is that PSA 9s are undervalued and PSA 9s should be worth more. Again, nobody cares what you think, what I think. The market has decided what PSA 9s are worth, and whether or not we agree with it, it just is the way that it is. Does it make sense? Maybe, maybe not. But when you look at the actual numbers, guys, cards are not rare these days, right? Like, there are numbered cards, there are serial numbered cards, there are short prints. Those are the rarer cards. But when you look at the base cards, when you look at the less rare parallels, the more common parallels, right? Those cards are printed in massive quantities. There are thousands and thousands of copies of those cards. If 10s are what everyone wants, and those are not rare because there are so many cards out there that plenty of them end up getting graded and plenty of them end up getting 10s, why would 9s be worth more? They're not going to be worth more. It's like, who do you know that would be excited to buy a silver medal on purpose if they could just pay a little bit extra and get a gold medal, right? Like, everyone's chasing the 10s because those are the cards that are most desirable. Those are the cards that have the longest history of holding value and rising in value over time, especially when you get into the right kinds of cards. And so, no, I wholeheartedly reject the notion that 9s should be worth more. They should not. They should be worth exactly what the market has decided that they're worth, which for the common cards is not that much more than raw price, sometimes even less than raw price. People aren't paying for grading to get a 9. They're paying for grading because they want to get a 10. And when you swing and miss, that's just the way it goes. Nobody owes you a profit just because you took a swing. Now, I will tell you that that swing gets you closer to your next PSA 10, so keep going, but 9s are worth what they're worth, and that's just the way that it is. On the more rare cards, you will see 9s bringing a premium, and I think that that's what a lot of people think should happen across the market, but you gotta understand basic supply and demand. The demand is there for the 10s. The demand is not there in the same way for the 9s, and the supply is enormous for both of them. So it makes sense that 10s and 9s are actually separating. Like, there's a widening gap between those grades for a lot of the cards out there. And so at the end of the day, grading is not perfect. It never has been. That's not the point, though. The point is to understand how the grading game works, to understand that there's human variance, there's human error built into the process. That's how it's always been. And you just have to understand that that is the game that you're signing up to play when you're grading cards. And even if grading isn't perfect, you can still build a consistent business on the grading game if you start leveling up your understanding of what types of cards to submit that are going to give you the best chance to turn a profit. And if you like this type of card talk and strategy, I post this stuff all the time. Don't forget to take 2 seconds to subscribe. We'll see you on the next one.